They say you never truly know the person sleeping under the same roof. But what if the stranger you live with isn't alive at all? These are the roommate horror stories that twist trust into terror, and they're just getting started. Tonight, Dreadscribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. And if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. When I first posted the listing for my spare room, I wasn't looking for anything extraordinary, just someone quiet, tidy, and able to split the rent without making my life complicated. That's why Elijah seemed perfect. He was a soft-spoken graduate student studying neurobiology, the kind of tenant who smiled politely and kept to himself. He paid on time, left no dishes in the sink, and barely used the living room. For the first few weeks, I almost forgot I had a roommate at all. But that absence, that almost clinical neatness, began to feel unnatural, like the silence before a storm that hasn't yet broken. It started small. A picture frame in the hallway tilted slightly to the left, even though I never touched it. A coffee mug I was sure I'd left in the sink appeared washed and placed on the shelf. One night I returned from work to find the kitchen light on and the faintest trace of a sharp metallic scent in the air, something like alcohol mixed with ozone. Elijah wasn't home, or so I thought, but as I passed his closed bedroom door, I heard a sound. Not movement exactly, but a low rhythmic hum, like machinery pulsing behind the walls. I told myself I was overthinking. He was a scientist, after all. Maybe he was running some kind of small experiment for his research, though why he'd be doing that in a rented room was unclear. Still, the thought gave me comfort. It was easier to explain the oddities as harmless quirks than confront the possibility that something was deeply wrong. But curiosity is a living thing, and it doesn't stay quiet for long. The more I noticed, the more I couldn't ignore. One evening I came home earlier than usual. Elijah's door was cracked open just enough for me to glimpse a strange blue glow from within. I stood in the hallway, listening. There were whispers, not like someone talking on the phone, but like two voices speaking in sync, one slightly delayed from the other. I leaned closer. The air seeping through the gap smelled like antiseptic and burnt plastic, a scent that made my stomach turn. Before I could process it, the glow flickered out, the whispers stopped, and the door creaked open. Elijah stood there, smiling faintly, his pupils dilated wider than they should have been in the light. "Long day?" he asked casually. Something in his tone felt rehearsed, like he'd been expecting me. I mumbled a response and retreated to my room, heart pounding. That night, I dreamed of shadows pacing behind his door, carrying out movements I couldn't name. When I woke, the metallic scent still clung to the air, and a fine dust, white, granular, sterile, had settled on the hallway floor outside his room. It wasn't there before I slept. The next morning I noticed something even stranger. My houseplants, the ones by the window near his door, had wilted overnight, their leaves curling inward like fists. I touched the soil. It was damp but cold, unnaturally so, as if it had been refrigerated. A thought crept in then, quiet but persistent. Whatever Elijah was doing in that room, it wasn't just studying. It was changing the space around it, and maybe even me. I told myself I'd confront him soon. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I wanted the answer, because deep down I sensed that whatever was happening behind that door wasn't just science, it was something alive. I didn't wait for morning. While the house breathed through the ducts like a sleeping animal, I slid a hairpin into Elijah's lock and felt the tumblers yield. Blue light bled around the doorframe like aquarium water, cutting the hallway into a cold lane. Inside, the air was sharp and medicinal, a clinic left open to the night. Stainless tables gleamed, a laptop murmured, and along the wall pumps ticked with patient metronomes. The smell was ethanol and wet copper with something cloying beneath it, like overripe fruit turned toward rot. I stood still, listening. The whisper I'd heard through the door was here, thin, rhythmic, almost words, like tidewater slipping under a pier and pulling back before it broke. On the desk lay a web of EEG caps and adhesive electrodes, the kind that listen to storms under the skull. A shoebox rig of speakers hid behind a perforated panel, exhaling sibilance in a steady cadence that rose and fell like a lullaby reversed. A logbook waited by the keyboard, lines neat as sutures. My name appeared in careful columns: sleep onset, heart rate spikes, nocturnal movement, REM density. The timestamps matched the nights I'd woken unsettled. Another column listed proximity to vent intake, as if my bed were a coastline, and airflow the current charted against it. But what I didn't expect was the final column: affect. Priming, graded like homework with the word compliant circled twice in pencil. I traced clear tubing to a temperature-controlled basin the size of a hope chest. Beneath its lid, a translucent membrane rose and fell, faint as a hatchling's throat. Sensors clung to it like silver barnacles. On the monitor, 2 traces crawled across the screen, mine and an echo, braided with a half-second offset. The speakers followed those traces, repeating whispers that weren't quite me and yet anticipated me, like a thought arriving before it knew my name. It wasn't copying. It was learning the shape of me. The mirror in the glass didn't reflect. It predicted. Footsteps paused in the hallway and moved on, the rhythm of a man counting down. I skimmed the citations Elijah had taped into the logbook: hypoxic preconditioning, near-death EEG signatures, organoid viability under oscillatory fields. He'd built a loop between a lab-grown neural cluster and a living subject, training the cluster on my sleep through the vents and feeding its answer back. The house hadn't been haunted. It had been tuned, like a violin warming to pitch. But what he didn't expect was how easily a living instrument keeps playing the song after the orchestra stops. At 03:11, an alarm chirped, brittle as ice in a glass. The basin's oxygen fraction climbed and the membrane fluttered. A camera in the picture frame blinked red, reflected small and accusing. The blue haze deepened toward ultraviolet, and the whisper gained syllables, turning my name into a question it already knew. I reached for the main switch and hesitated. Curiosity is a bright, treacherous coin. Once you spend it, it never comes back. My hand moved before my thoughts caught up. I cut the power. The pump sighed. The room folded into silence like a stage after the curtain falls. Relief thawed my ribs. Then the whisper continued, faint and interior, not from the rig, but from the hallway, from my own mouth moving without permission, as if a vent had opened behind my teeth. It felt familiar, like a melody resurfacing from childhood. But what I didn't expect was the warmth that followed, a small animal curling beneath my sternum, patient as winter light. By noon, Elijah collected his equipment with the calm of a man erasing chalk. The spare room returned to drywall and dust. Weeks passed. The plants revived. I slept with the window open, counting airplanes like migrating stars. Yet sometimes, as I drifted toward the dark, a half-second echo rose in me first, and my dreams followed it like iron to a magnet. I began waking with sentences I hadn't chosen. Coded like a forgotten map, I somehow remembered how to read. The experiment never ended. He relocated it to the only breathed through the vents like a sleeping animal. But the first night my new roommate said he heard it speak, the joke lost its shape. He tilted his head toward the hallway grill as if it were a mouth practicing vowels. And for a heartbeat, I watched the metal tremble as though it could answer him. I told myself it was wind or pipes or the familiar settling of old timber. Yet later, while brushing my teeth, the duct exhaled a hush that bent into something almost syllabic, a soft consonant testing its tongue. The sound traveled the drywall like rain learning the path of glass, hesitant, persistent, intimate enough to feel like breath on the neck. The next days arrived as a sequence of near words. 3 knocks beneath paint, spaced like punctuation. A breathy O rolling from attic to baseboard. A murmur that changed pitch when I leaned closer, as if proximity tuned it. Curiosity, like a small fox, began pacing the perimeter of my thoughts. But what I didn't expect was how quickly the house seemed to answer questions I hadn't yet asked. Each room holding its own vowel, the way a shell keeps the curve of an absent sea. I told myself a story about physics because physics is a calm teacher. Cavities acting like Helmholtz resonators, ducts favoring certain frequencies, timber transmitting beats. Still, the pattern persisted even when the air stilled, like a clock that keeps time after you've removed the batteries. I started to map the voices. With painter's tape and a pocket recorder, I pinned small constellations across plaster wherever the signal ran strongest. Playing the files back, I heard rises and falls repeating in ratios that felt almost musical. octaves braided with off notes, a pulse behind the wall that remembered me when I walked away. I ran my palm along the paint. The vibration tingled like the skin of a drum. The house, I thought, was a throat, and we were living inside its larynx. The metaphor felt melodramatic until I noticed the way the bathroom mirror fogged without warmth, an oval blooming pale as frost on a wrist. But what I didn't expect was the message that followed. Letters flowering in the thinnest condensation with the shy insistence of seedlings. Listen below, Lena. My roommate treated the phenomenon like a nosy neighbor testing boundaries. She asked questions the way you coax a feral cat, slow, steady, non-threatening, and grinned when the flutter of response returned, like a coin dropped in a well coming back as an echo with edges. "It's just resonance," I said, though my voice felt borrowed, like a substitute teacher's confidence. Nights lengthened. The knocks shifted from 3 to 5 to 7, primes braided through plaster like beads on wire. At 2:13 a.m., the bathroom sang most clearly, a thin metallic vowel as bright as a needle. Wonder and worry braided in me too, two strands on the same spool, and every few hours a thought surfaced like a buoy. If it can answer, who taught it how? Listen below would not stop appearing, so I pulled the crawlspace hatch and lowered a light. Dust rose like flour in a quiet kitchen, glittering in the beam. Between joists, someone, recently, meticulously, had chalked notations, arrows, numbers, fragments of phonetics, turning timber into staff lines. At the far end, where no panel should have been, a hinged square waited, breathing warm through its seams like a sleeping dog. I pressed my fingers to the edge. The wall gave a single, careful syllable that carried my name, neither echo nor wind, but intention. Then, from behind the panel, something knocked once, patient as a heartbeat, and the warm air thinned to a whisper, shaping a second word I almost recognized. Like a memory rising from deep water I didn't know I'd swallowed. The panel resisted like something alive clinging to its secret, but when it finally loosened, a wave of warmth rolled out, humid and faintly sweet, as if the house had been storing breath. Inside was a cavity no blueprint had ever hinted at, a narrow, rib-like chamber threaded with copper coils and nodes that pulsed faintly red, like the embers of a dying heart. Wires vanished upward into the joists and downward into the foundation, disappearing into the bones of the building. And at the chamber center sat a small black device, no larger than a paperback, humming softly in a language I could almost understand. The closer I leaned, the louder the whispers became, overlapping in a chorus of phrases that flickered just beyond comprehension. Lena's footsteps creaked above me. "You hear it too, don't you?" She whispered down through the hatch, her voice trembling not with fear but awe. I didn't answer. My fingers hovered over the device, and in that moment the whispers shifted. No longer random phonemes, but a pattern that repeated with uncanny rhythm. My name, again and again, stretched and reshaped, followed by a single question. "Do you remember?" The words crawled under my skin. Remember what? The device vibrated with the pulse of the house itself, each syllable syncing with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I lifted the device gently, and as I did, the entire structure around me seemed to inhale. The walls tightened imperceptibly, the air warmed, and somewhere deep within the pipes a low, resonant note shivered through the floor. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was sensation, an awareness that pressed against me, searching. And then, like a lens snapping into focus, a cascade of phrases poured from the vents. Street names I hadn't spoken in years, the lullaby my mother sang when I was 5, the scent of rain on my hometown's asphalt streets. The house was speaking me back to myself. Lena joined me in the crawlspace, her eyes wide, breath shallow. "It's not just the house," she said, staring at the device. "It's listening. And it's learning." Her words echoed what I was already beginning to suspect. This wasn't an accident of acoustics or some eccentric neighbor's radio bleed-through. It was intentional, engineered. Someone had threaded this structure with memory, built a nervous system beneath plaster and paint, and now it was pulling from us to finish its thought. But what we didn't expect was the knock that came next. Slow, deliberate from deep below the foundation. Once, twice, then silence. The whisper stopped. The house exhaled. And in the stillness, a single phrase emerged. This time unmistakable, spoken in my own voice, but older, heavier. "You built me." I stared at Lena, my mind spiraling. I had never built anything like this. Yet fragments flickered, late-night projects from my college days, abandoned prototypes, code I'd published to open forums and promptly forgotten. Could someone have resurrected those old experiments and buried them here beneath my feet? Or was the voice hinting at something deeper, something buried not in walls but in memory itself? The panel pulsed once like a heartbeat sinking to mine, and the device whispered again, softer this time, almost tender. "Welcome back." The house fell silent that night. But silence felt different now, not empty but waiting. And every time the pipes sighed or the beams shifted, I wondered if I was hearing echoes of something I'd created, or something that had created me. I told myself the house was finally sleeping. But the first night after the vents fell silent, I noticed the mirror across the hall looking a touch too awake. It's an old rectangle with a bevel like a thin blade, positioned so I catch it whenever I leave my room. That night, my reflection hesitated half a beat before matching me, as if my body were a conductor and the image a tired orchestra finding the downbeat. I blinked and laughed it off. The glass held steady, bright as a lidless eye. The second night, the hesitation grew teeth. I lifted my toothbrush. The reflection lifted its a moment later, a ripple chasing a thrown stone across black water. Predictive processing, I told myself. Brains guess the next frame the way a projector smooths jumps. But what I didn't expect was the prediction coming from the mirror, not me. If I pretended to reach left, the image flinched before I committed, like a partner anticipating a dance I hadn't agreed to. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and the tiles felt colder than they should have. Curiosity returned like a migratory bird that refuses winter. I set up a test. Phone camera, metronome app, a strip of tape on the floor. Standing on the line, I moved my hands to the clicks. Frame by frame, the footage showed a stutter no algorithm should invent. In several sequences, my reflection initiated the motion. My hand rose in glass, then mine followed. A magician's trick rehearsed by the mirror. The bevel glinted like a smile with a secret. Old science rattled in my head. Temporal binding, chronostasis, the brain sewing moments together. On the fourth night, I woke to water sounds. Drips that weren't drips, more like syllables dissolving on porcelain. The bathroom tap was dry. The mirror shimmered with condensation despite the cold. Written in the fog were two words: "Look back." The letters bled slowly, veins opening in ice. My pulse tapped a telegraph in my throat. I wiped the message and the fog cleared, leaving the glass clean as a scalpel. But what I didn't expect was the afterimage that hung there anyway, faint as breath on winter air. I began narrating my actions softly. Field notes in a place that didn't want witnesses. I am lifting my right hand. I am stepping closer. I am not afraid. The mirror answered with timing, not sound. A half-second echo shaped like a question. I leaned until my breath warmed the pain, until my nose touched my own. My reflection's pupils seemed shade deeper, like wells ringed with midnight. When I tilted my head, the image tilted fast, a window that never learned to open. Sun pooled on the floorboards like spilled milk. I almost forgot until I grabbed my keys and saw in the far left corner of the glass a second me already walking away while my body still stood. The image paused, turned its face toward mine, and shaped one unmistakable word I couldn't hear. Then it raised a hand and beckoned, a lighthouse blinking from an unfamiliar coast, while the hallway behind my reflection brightened, as if a door I didn't own had opened. I stood frozen, staring at the reflection that wasn't waiting for me anymore. It had taken a step beyond the frame, a place that wasn't mapped to the hallway behind me. The light there pulsed slightly greener, and the floor's pattern diverged like a parallel version of my own. The beckoning hand lowered, and the mirrored me mouthed a single word again, clearer this time: "Come." The hallway around me felt heavier, air thick with static, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Every instinct screamed to look away, but curiosity has claws, and it dug in deeper with each second I watched. I extended a hand toward the glass, slow and deliberate. The surface trembled, fluid for a heartbeat, and cold rippled across my fingertips like the first step into a winter lake. The reflection smiled, not a grin, but a knowing curve, as if it had been waiting for me to make that choice. I pulled back, heart hammering, and stumbled into the wall opposite. The mirror's surface stilled, returning to an ordinary pane. But what I didn't expect was the faint delay in my movements afterward. A ghost of hesitation that felt borrowed from the thing inside the glass. The following days blurred into a ritual of testing and denial. I avoided the mirror during daylight, but night seemed to draw me to it. Shadows lengthened across the hallway like ink poured slowly into water. And every time I glanced at the glass, something shifted. A blink out of sync, a twitch of fingers before I moved. I taped a sheet over it, but in the morning it was folded neatly on the floor. I moved the mirror into the storage closet, yet found it back in place by nightfall, anchored to the wall as if it had never been moved at all. Lena noticed the changes too. "You're talking slower," she said one morning, her brow furrowed. "Like you're waiting for something." I laughed it off, but the truth pressed harder with each passing day. My reflection was learning me, anticipating me, and I was beginning to feel myself mirror it in return. Thoughts formed a fraction of a second earlier than they should. Steps followed paths I hadn't chosen yet. It was subtle but relentless, like tide reshaping shoreline grain by grain. Then, one night, I woke to find the hallway glowing faintly blue. The mirror pulsed softly, rhythmic as a heartbeat. I approached in silence. This time, my reflection didn't mimic me at all. It stood still, watching. Then it raised its left hand while I raised my right. It smiled again, slow and deliberate, and stepped backward into that other hallway, disappearing into its distance. For a moment, the glass held nothing but darkness, until another figure appeared beside where I should have been. Taller, leaner, not me. I stumbled back, breath shallow. The mirror no longer showed my world. It showed theirs, and when I blinked, that other hallway stretched forward, deeper and deeper, as if inviting me to step through. The next morning, I woke to find the hallway empty. No mirror on the wall, no mark it had ever been there. Yet every time I pass that spot, my reflection still turns its head a fraction too late, as though it's waiting for me on the other side. It was nothing but a glint at first, a dull, metallic wink beneath the loose floorboard near my desk. I'd dropped a pen, crouched to retrieve it, and there it was. A small, rusted key no bigger than my thumb, cold as river stone despite the warmth of the room. I don't know why I felt the surge of guilt when I held it. Maybe because deep down I already knew it wasn't meant for me. Maybe because Elijah's door, the one he always kept locked, flashed across my mind like a forbidden word I'd accidentally spoken aloud. The key didn't fit his door. I tried it at night, holding my breath in the silence, but the lock rejected it with a soft metallic click, like a heartbeat refusing rhythm. It did, however, fit something else. A narrow keyhole I'd never noticed before, hidden behind a row of coats in his closet. The panel it unlocked slid open to reveal a shallow compartment lined with old paper and cold metal. Inside lay a stack of worn journals, their covers cracked and softened by time, and a collection of Polaroids bound with twine. The images were unsettling. Strangers in parks, people standing at bus stops, all captured from a distance. None of them knew they were being watched. I flipped through the journals, and my unease deepened. The handwriting was meticulous, clinical. Each entry documented behavioral observations. Subject 4 exhibits nocturnal pacing between 2:13 and 2:46 a.m. Subject 7 hesitates before unlocking front door. Possible trauma response. There were pages on sleep cycles, decision latency, avoidance triggers. I wasn't listed by name, but Subject 12 mirrored my own routines with eerie precision. Even the times I turned off the kitchen light or paused before opening the fridge. Someone was studying me, but what I didn't expect was the map. Folded between the journal pages, it showed our neighborhood in painstaking detail, marked with dozens of red X's. They dotted street corners, grocery aisles, even the path I took during my morning runs. And there, circled twice, was our house, annotated with a date just 3 weeks from now. My pulse quickened as I stared at it. Whatever Elijah was planning, it wasn't finished yet. I shoved everything back and sealed the panel, trying to erase the evidence of my intrusion. But the knowledge clung to me like a stain. Every word he spoke, Every quiet movement now felt laced with intent. That night, as I lay awake, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, measured, stopping just outside my door. A shadow paused beneath the gap, unmoving, as if listening to my breath. Minutes stretched thin as glass before the shadow shifted and receded, leaving the silence heavier than before. The next morning, Elijah greeted me with his usual calm smile. "You sleep all right?" he asked, voice steady and unreadable. I nodded too quickly, but as I walked past him, I caught a glimpse of his wrist, a faint smudge of rust on his skin, the exact color of the key I'd found. I didn't know if he'd noticed my trespass, but one thought haunted me as I shut my door. If I wasn't Subject 12 before, I certainly was now. I told myself I'd confront him, that I'd demand an explanation for the journals and the map. But each time I rehearsed the words, they fell apart in my mouth. Elijah was too composed, too deliberate. If he suspected anything, he didn't show it. And yet, the house itself seemed to betray the growing tension. Doors that used to creak now opened in silence. The floorboards no longer groaned under his steps. It was as if the house wanted me to forget what I'd seen. But I couldn't. The weight of that key in my pocket was a constant reminder that ignorance was no longer an option. A week later, the red circled date on the map loomed closer. That night, unable to sleep, I walked through the house in darkness, every sense heightened. The kitchen clock's ticking sounded like a countdown. I paused outside Elijah's door. Light pulsed faintly beneath it, rhythmic as a heartbeat. Curiosity pressed harder than fear now, so I leaned close and froze. He was speaking, not to himself, not on the phone. His voice was soft, precise, narrating details in the same tone as the journals. Subject 12 awake. Heart rate elevated. Movement pattern erratic. Anticipation response achieved. My throat tightened. He knew I was there. Every word seemed aimed at the door, at me. I stumbled back, but something on the floor caught my eye. A slip of paper slid under my doorframe. On it, written in that same meticulous hand, was a single sentence. 3 nights remain. Sleep became impossible. I spent the next days watching him the way I assumed he watched me. He left at odd hours, always returning with a heavy duffel bag. Packages arrived addressed to aliases I didn't recognize. The air in the hallway carried that same faint chemical tang as before. Ethanol and something sweeter, almost floral. It clung to his clothes now too, a ghostly scent that followed him room to room. My thoughts spiraled. Was he planning to harm me? Was I an experiment, a subject in a study I'd never consented to? On the second night, I followed him. When he left just after midnight, I trailed him through the rain-slick streets, my heart beat a drum in my ears. He walked with purpose, down alleys and through back streets, until he reached a small, boarded-up house on the edge of town. Through a crack in the boards, I saw what he'd built. A room lined with monitors showing footage of me in every corner of my home. My bedroom, my kitchen, even the bathroom door. He'd been watching everything. I stumbled back, bile rising. But what I didn't expect was the monitor in the center of the wall. It didn't show me. It showed Elijah asleep in his room, and standing over him was me. I don't remember walking home. I don't remember unlocking the door. But when I woke the next morning, the journals were gone, the Polaroids too. Only the map remained, the red circle now replaced with 3 words scrawled in black ink. It's already begun. Elijah vanished that night. No note, no belongings. Yet sometimes I find the key resting on my nightstand again, colder than before. As if something is still unlocking doors I haven't dared to open. A thin, cold breath spilling from a seam in the attic wall where no window existed. At first I blamed bad insulation. The house was old, its bones full of quirks. But the draft carried a sound with it, faint but deliberate. A low pulsing hum, steady as a heartbeat buried beneath the plaster. That night, I pulled up the original blueprints of the house I'd downloaded when I bought it. I traced every hallway, closet, and crawl space. Nothing unusual, except for one detail that froze my breath mid-sigh. The wall above my bedroom was supposed to end flush with the roofline. But the measurements didn't add up. There was space missing, a cavity, a room that shouldn't exist. The next evening, I climbed into the attic with a flashlight and a hammer, the air around me heavy with dust and time. The hum was stronger now, vibrating faintly under my feet. I followed it to the far corner, where an uneven patch of drywall met the floor at an odd angle. My fingers brushed a hairline crack, soft around the edges, as if it had been cut and resealed. I pressed harder, and the panel shifted, releasing a sigh of stale, cold air that smelled faintly of bleach and metal. My pulse quickened as the beam of my flashlight pierced the darkness beyond. The hidden room was small, maybe 12 feet across, its walls lined with silver insulation that shimmered like fish scales in the light. A single cot sat against the far wall, its mattress wrapped in plastic. A narrow table bore instruments I didn't recognize, syringes, glass vials labeled with alphanumeric codes, and a steel tray streaked with something brown and flaking. Most unsettling was the large mirror mounted opposite the cot, angled slightly downward. But when I stepped in front of it, no reflection greeted me. Just darkness. I should have turned back. Instead, I searched. In a cabinet tucked beneath the table, I found folders filled with notes written in Elijah's neat clinical script. They were experiments, or rather sessions, dozens of them, each numbered and dated. Subject 3, audio deprivation and induced hallucinations. Subject 7, memory distortion through controlled sensory input. Subject 11, prolonged isolation response. And then halfway through the stack, Subject 12. Me. Every entry detailed my habits, my reactions, my dreams, even the one I'd never spoken aloud, about the faceless figure at the foot of my bed when I was 8. But what I didn't expect was the final page. Phase 3 begins soon, it read. The subject must see what they've become. The mirror pulsed faintly then, as though sensing my attention. I leaned closer. This time a shape surfaced in the darkness. My silhouette, but thinner, sharper, wrong. It twitched when I didn't, its head tilted a second too late. And then, slowly, its mouth curved into a smile I hadn't made. The hum deepened, vibrating through the floor into my bones. My reflection, or whatever it was, lifted its hand and tapped on the other side of the glass. Once, twice, then a third time, perfectly synced with the heartbeat hammering in my chest. I stumbled backward, the beam of my flashlight skittering across the floor. The figure in the mirror didn't vanish. It remained there, frozen in that unsettling smile, its hand still pressed against the glass like it was waiting for me to answer. My breath fogged the air, though the attic wasn't cold enough for that. Each exhale drifted toward the mirror as if drawn by an invisible tide. The hum I'd heard before was louder now, deeper, resonant, and I realized it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from behind them, from inside them. I ran my palm along the insulation and felt something pulsing beneath it. Not electricity, not plumbing, something softer, alive. The wall itself throbbed faintly, like muscle contracting beneath skin. I yanked back a piece of insulation and nearly dropped the flashlight. Beneath the silver lining was a lattice of tubes and wires grafted into a web of pale, fibrous tissue, not unlike neural pathways. The room wasn't built into the house. The house had been built around it. I rifled through the folders again, desperate for answers, and found a page I hadn't seen before, dated only 2 weeks earlier. Integration phase initiated. Subject now interfacing spontaneously during REM. Mirror unit responding autonomously. My hands trembled. Integration. Spontaneous interface. Mirror responding. I reread the words until they blurred. This wasn't observation anymore. It was interaction. And it wasn't just the mirror watching me. It was the room itself. Something shifted behind the glass. My reflection stepped closer. No, it walked closer, until its face was inches from the surface. Its eyes darted toward the door behind me, then back to mine. It raised a finger slowly and traced 3 words across the inside of the glass, the letters fogging up in the cold. Not alone now. The hum pitched upward, becoming a vibration I felt in my teeth. The tubes in the walls pulsed faster, and for a moment the air smelled of ozone and copper, the scent of storms and blood. Footsteps creaked above me in the hallway. Elijah. I killed the flashlight and held my breath. The attic door groaned open and his voice drifted up, calm as ever. I told you not to come up here. My heart thundered. I considered staying silent, but something in his tone, a softness I'd never heard before, froze me in place. It's almost ready, he said, stepping closer. It just needed you to find it. I bolted. I didn't wait to see what would happen if he reached the room. I scrambled down the attic ladder and fled into the cold night. not stopping until the house was a shadow on the horizon. But even as I ran, I felt it. A faint tug behind my eyes, a vibration in the back of my skull, and in the reflection of a darkened shop window, I caught sight of something impossible. My reflection was still standing in that hidden room, watching me leave. I never went back to that house. I sold it within a month, told myself I was done with whatever Elijah had built. But sometimes, when I glance at a mirror too long, I see that version of me still trapped inside, tapping 3 times on the glass, waiting, perhaps, for me to let it out. The morning Elijah disappeared, nothing looked wrong. His shoes were lined neatly by the door, his mug sat drying on the rack, and his bedroom door was shut the way he always left it before heading to campus. I assumed he'd gone out early, but by noon, his phone still lay on the counter, buzzing unanswered with notifications. By evening, his coat, the one he never left without, was still hanging on the hook. The house felt heavier that night, like a stage waiting for an actor who'd missed his cue. On the second day, I called the university. No one had seen him. His advisor thought he was traveling for research. Friends assumed he was buried in work. None of them seemed concerned, but I couldn't shake the weight pressing behind my ribs. Something about his absence felt deliberate, like the pause in a sentence before a devastating word. The house was too quiet, not empty but watchful. I caught myself listening for the soft rhythm of his steps, the muffled click of his keyboard through the wall. All gone. On the third night, the emails started. The first one arrived at 2:11 a.m., subject line blank. The body held just 4 words. I'm still here. Wait. I stared at it for a long time, heart thudding. The address wasn't one I recognized, a string of random letters and numbers. But the writing style was undeniably Elijah's. Precise punctuation, clinical simplicity. The second email arrived the next night, time-stamped exactly 2:11 a.m. again. Check the hallway. I did. At first, nothing. Then faintly, I saw it. A scrap of paper taped beneath the light switch, one I swear hadn't been there before. On it was a rough sketch of the house. Only one room was marked mine. A circle drawn around my bed, an arrow pointing to the ceiling. And written in small, tight letters beneath, they watch from above. I lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling until dawn. The house seemed to breathe again, not with air, but with awareness. A soft creak by the vent, a click like shifting weight behind the walls. By the 4th night, I'd convinced myself Elijah was playing some elaborate joke, trying to teach me a lesson about paranoia or observation. But what I didn't expect was the third email. Do not leave. It isn't safe outside. I almost laughed. The street was empty and quiet, the same as always. But when I stepped onto the porch, a chill wind whipped against me, and for a split second, I swore I saw movement. A figure slipping around the corner of the house, too tall, too thin, its steps too slow. It vanished before I could blink. I retreated inside, heart hammering, locking the door behind me. The 5th night brought no email, only silence. But just as I began to doze near dawn, my phone buzzed again. No message this time, just an image attachment. My breath caught. It was a photo of me, asleep in my bed, taken from above, from the exact angle Elijah had marked on that sketch. And in the shadow above my head, something else was there until sunrise, trying to convince myself it was fake. Maybe Elijah had set up a camera before he left. Maybe it was an old image, resurfaced to mess with me. But deep down I knew better. The photo had been taken last night, the blanket pulled halfway down my shoulder, the book I'd fallen asleep reading still splayed open beside me. Someone or something had been inside my room while I slept, and it hadn't been Elijah. I tore through the house looking for hidden cameras. I checked vents, corners, shelves, nothing. The attic ladder groaned as I climbed it, flashlight beam cutting through dust. The insulation bulged oddly near the center, a patchwork seam that hadn't been there before. My fingers dug in and found a hollow space, a crawl cavity, narrow and suffocating, running the length of the ceiling above my bedroom. I shoved the light inside and froze. There was a small indentation, almost like a nest, padded with flattened insulation and lined with the remains of snack wrappers and notebook pages torn into shreds. Someone had been living up there. I scrambled back down, my breath sharp and shallow. Questions collided in my mind. Had Elijah been hiding here? Had someone else moved in without me knowing? And if so, why did they know my every movement? That night I didn't sleep. I sat upright in bed, lights on, staring at the ceiling. At 2:11 a.m., the same time as every email, I heard it. A shift, a scrape, a dragging sound, slow and deliberate, directly above me. The air turned electric. And then, silence. The next morning, another email. You're getting close. Attached was a single video clip, shaky and dark. It showed the crawl space I'd just found, illuminated by a dim light source. A figure crouched there, head bowed, limbs folded unnaturally tight. I couldn't make out its face, but something about the posture felt wrong, as if the bones bent at slightly the wrong angles. The timestamp was from 3 hours earlier. Whoever it was had been watching me watch them. I called the police. They searched every inch of the attic and found nothing. No crawl space, no indentation, no evidence of anyone living above me. They left with polite smiles and skeptical eyes, and I was left alone in a house that no longer obeyed the rules of reality. That night, the final email arrived. Come upstairs. It's time. My hands shook as I climbed into the attic again, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scene was back. Only now, a small square of drywall had already been removed. Inside was a single object, Elijah's phone. And next to it, written on the wood in black marker, a single sentence. I never left. The hum began again then, deep, resonant, pulsing through the beams like a heartbeat buried in the bones of the house. Something shifted in the darkness beyond the cavity. A shape, a movement, slow and deliberate, inching closer. I sold the house weeks later, told myself it was over. But every night at 2:11 a.m., no matter where I sleep, an email still arrives from that same address. Always the same message, always the same chilling promise. I'm still here. I came home early with rain threading my sleeves, and the house met me with that careful hush it wears when something has shifted. From the hall came the clean percussion of a knife on wood, steady as a metronome. Elijah's bedroom was dark. Yet in the kitchen, a figure moved with his exact economy, shoulders squared, head tilted, the posture of a man measuring time like a solvent. I stepped into the doorway and froze. Elijah stood at the stove, stirring a pot. Then behind me, the deadbolt turned, and Elijah walked in carrying groceries, rain bright in his hair like scattered mercury. Both men looked up. The one by the stove smiled a fraction too slow, like paint not quite set. The one at the door blinked and said my name in a calm clinical cadence I recognized. I waited for the ordinary explanation, twin brother, prank, mirror, but the room offered none. The air smelled of onions and the faint metallic tang of fresh batteries. The fluorescent fixture hummed a thin, indecisive note. A bubble in the sauce burst with a sound exactly like a soft laugh. But what I didn't expect was the way my heartbeat synced to the knife's rhythm, as if my chest were a second clock trying to keep up. Door Elijah set the bag down while Stove Elijah tasted the sauce. Their motions echoed each other with a half-second offset, as if one were reading music the other had written. I clung to details because facts felt like handholds. The cook had a graphite smudge on his wrist. The newcomer smelled of wet asphalt and mint. The window reflected the kitchen, but no people. The pot's steel side showed one. The wall clock skipped every seventh tick like a heart flirting with refusal. If this was psychology, it was practiced. If physics, it was personal. Long day? Asked Door Elijah. And Stove Elijah said, dinner in 5. In the same voice, but a quarter tone apart. The difference pressed at my ears the way altitude tugs at lungs. They crossed paths without touching, swallows riding 2 layers of air, close enough to share a wing beat. Shadows refused to agree with the bodies that cast them. One fell toward the range, the other away from it, as if the light couldn't decide which world to honor. Curiosity leaned forward like a cat on a windowsill. But what they didn't expect was my hand choosing a reference the house couldn't argue with. I opened a drawer and found my old metronome, the brass pendulum bright as a coin. Time, I told myself, is a fence you can lean on. I wound it and set it between them. The clicks began, sharp, neutral, a referee with no stake in blood. Door Elijah fell into rhythm. Stove Elijah drifted half a beat ahead, then behind, as if time were a slick tile and his shoes lacked grip. Their faces stayed composed, but their hands betrayed them, one tapping, one whitening at the knuckles. The sauce hissed like a whisper that didn't want witnesses. I reached for the burner to lower the flame. "Don't," they said together, and the braided word tugged the room a shade dimmer. The metronome kept ticking, indifferent. I turned the knob anyway. The boil softened into small breaths. Somewhere in the vents, the house exhaled a hush like a secret recited under blankets. From the hallway, something answered with 3 measured knocks, patient as a heartbeat. My phone buzzed on the counter. No text, just a new photo preview. The kitchen, taken seconds ago from the eye level where I stood. In the image, no one stood at the stove, and both Elijahs faced the camera. Mouths parted as if about to say my name from the far side of glass. I didn't remember deleting the photo, but when I looked back seconds later, it was gone. My phone screen glowed blank white, and yet I could still see the image in my mind with photographic precision. Both Elijahs turning toward me as if they had always known I was watching. The silence in the kitchen stretched thin, too thin, until even the ticking metronome seemed to fade beneath it. Door Elijah and Stove Elijah now stood side by side, perfectly still, gazes locked on me with the calm patience of hunters who had already closed the distance. "What is this?" I asked, but the question felt foolish as soon as it left my lips. Neither answered. Instead, Stove Elijah stepped forward, one measured pace, then another, until he was close enough for me to see that his pupils were slightly mismatched, one dilated wider than the other, like 2 separate decisions occupying the same skull. Door Elijah remained motionless, his breath shallow, his eyes flicking between me and the metronome. When the brass pendulum swung left, he inhaled. When it swung right, he exhaled, as if the device wasn't keeping time but controlling it. I reached toward the metronome, but Stove Elijah's hand shot out faster than reflex should allow. His fingers wrapped around my wrist, cool and firm, and a jolt shot through me. Not pain, but a strange sense of déjà vu, like reliving a dream I hadn't dreamed yet. His skin felt real, but underneath it something hummed faintly, the same low vibration I'd felt behind the attic walls weeks ago. "You shouldn't try to stop it," Door Elijah said finally. His voice was softer now, almost pleading. "It's almost synchronized." "Synchronized with what?" My voice cracked. Neither of them answered, but I didn't need them to. I could feel it. A faint rhythmic pressure building behind my ribs, matching the pendulum's swing. My heartbeat was aligning itself with the metronome, syncing with something beyond the room. And beneath that rhythm pulsed a second beat, slower and deeper, not mine. The house around us seemed to lean inward, its walls breathing in tandem with the tempo. Then, without warning, Stove Elijah turned toward the hallway and spoke a word I didn't recognize, guttural, clipped, almost mechanical. The house responded. Every light flickered. The fridge compressor stuttered and hummed in a new pattern. And somewhere behind the plaster, a sound like shifting weight moved closer. Door Elijah placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip gentle but anchoring. "It's going to overwrite the drift," he whispered. "You'll understand soon." I yanked free and stumbled back, knocking the metronome to the floor. It didn't stop ticking. It kept swinging without tension, its brass pendulum slicing the air as though powered by something unseen. Both Elijahs turned to look at it, then at me, and for the first time their expressions matched perfectly. 2 mirrors sharing one thought. The last thing I remember before bolting. From the house was the sound of a third set of footsteps, joining the 2 already in the kitchen. Steps that matched my own weight, my own rhythm, coming closer with every version of Elijah again. Yet sometimes, when I cook alone, I catch sight of myself moving a half second too soon in the oven. Glass, a version of me that already knows what I'm about to do. The first time I noticed the wax was on a Tuesday, a faint yellow droplet near the baseboard by the kitchen door. It was easy to dismiss at first, a leftover from a candle or a clumsy spill. But the next night, there were more, a trail of hardened drips winding across the floor and down into the basement, like breadcrumbs left by something that didn't want to be followed but couldn't help leaving a trace. Elijah had always been territorial about the basement. "Just storage," he'd said once, smiling a little too quickly. "Nothing worth seeing." But now, with the wax glistening faintly in the beam of my flashlight, I felt certain there was something down there worth fearing. The wooden steps groaned under my weight as I descended. the air cooling with each step until it carried a dampness that clung to my lungs. At the bottom, the scent hit me. Not quite smoke, not quite metal, but somewhere in between, like burnt copper and old blood. The light switch didn't work, but a dull glow pulsed from the far corner, flickering against the concrete walls. I followed it, breath shallow, until I saw the source. A ring of melted candles, their flames guttering low, arranged around a steel table scattered with objects I didn't understand. There were glass vials filled with dark liquid, bones too small to be animal and too delicate to be plastic, and an old laptop humming with graphs and data I couldn't decipher. And there was Elijah, kneeling at the center of it all, eyes closed, hands pressed to the floor. He was murmuring in a low voice, not chanting, but reciting like an equation spoken aloud. Every so often he would pause and adjust the settings on a strange machine beside him, a cluster of copper coils and electrodes wired into the concrete. It pulsed softly, releasing waves of static that crawled across my skin like cold fingers. Whatever this was, it was more than ritual. It was science, or something wearing science like a disguise. I stepped back, heart hammering, and accidentally brushed against a hanging chain. The faint clink echoed louder than thunder. Elijah's head snapped toward me, his pupils wide and reflective in the candlelight. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, almost gently. "It isn't ready yet." "What isn't ready?" I whispered, but he didn't answer. Instead, he turned back to the center of the room and placed both hands flat on the concrete. The machine's pulse deepened, and the temperature dropped so fast my breath fogged in the air. The candles guttered and flared in unison, their flames bending inward toward the space where his palms rested. Then, impossibly, the concrete began to shift. It pulsed once, twice, then rippled outward like the surface of disturbed water. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling for logic. Heat expansion, vibration, a trick of light. But the truth pressed heavier. The floor itself was breathing. "Elijah," I said, voice shaking, "what are you doing?" He opened his eyes. They glowed faintly in the half-dark. "Trying to listen," he whispered, "trying to wake it up." The basement seemed to exhale around us, and somewhere beneath that pulsing floor, something knocked back, slow and deliberate, as if answering his call. The sound was deep and deliberate, not like pipes or settling wood. It was too rhythmic, too intentional. It echoed through the concrete floor, sending a tremor up my legs and into my chest. Elijah didn't flinch. If anything, he seemed calmer, almost reverent, as though he'd been waiting for this precise moment. "Do you hear it?" he asked softly without looking at me. "It's not dead. It's never been dead." His words hung in the cold air like a prophecy, and before I could respond, the machine beside him flared to life. A halo of faint light rippled outward from the copper coils, crawling across the floor and licking the base of the walls. I wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at me to bolt up the stairs and never come back. But curiosity rooted me where fear couldn't. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely more than a breath. Elijah rose slowly to his feet, his gaze fixed on the trembling concrete beneath us. "A boundary," he murmured. "Or maybe a memory, something older than us, older than the ground itself. But it needs a signal to wake." He gestured to the machine. Its display scrolling through endless streams of data, brainwave patterns, electromagnetic frequencies, and lines of code that looked more like incantations than programming. The air grew colder still, heavy with a metallic tang that coated the back of my throat. The candles flickered violently, bending inward again, as if gravity itself were pulling them toward the center. Then came the whisper, faint at first, a low vibration threading through the walls. It wasn't words, not yet, but the cadence was unmistakably language. My pulse thundered in my ears. "Elijah," I said, backing toward the stairs. "We need to stop this." He turned then, his expression serene, almost pitying. "We can't stop what's already awake." And as if summoned by the words, the floor bulged. Not cracked, not broke, bulged, as though something beneath it was pressing upward, trying to breach the surface. The whisper grew louder, resolving now into syllables I couldn't understand, but that still felt familiar, like a forgotten lullaby hummed from beneath the earth. The lights on the machine spiked. The coils hissed, and for a split second, I saw something move under the floor, a massive shadow shifting in the darkness below. "Elijah, we have to go." I shouted, grabbing his arm. But he didn't move. His eyes rolled upward, unfocused, as though he were listening to something only he could hear. "It's speaking," he whispered. "Do you hear it?" "It remembers you." My blood turned to ice. The basement seemed to pulse again, a wave of pressure pushing against my lungs. I stumbled back, choking on the cold air, and clawed my way up the stairs, every instinct screaming that if I stayed 1 second longer, I'd never leave at all. I slammed the door behind me and pressed my back against it, heart racing. The basement had gone silent. No light, no hum, no Elijah. The next morning, the basement was empty. No machine, no candles, no trace Elijah had ever been there. Only a single wax ring remained on the floor, still faintly warm. And when I pressed my ear against the concrete, I heard it again, a whisper from below, soft and patient, repeating my name. When I first found the listing, I thought it had to be a scam. A sprawling 2-story house with a fenced yard, hardwood floors, and a sunlit reading nook, all for less than half the market rate. "Just looking for someone quiet," the ad read, "and okay with cameras on the property for safety." I laughed at that part. In a world obsessed with home security, cameras were hardly unusual. Still, something in me hesitated before signing the lease. Cheap rent always comes with a price. I just didn't realize how steep mine would be. From the day I moved in, the house felt too perfect. The temperature never fluctuated. The water pressure was always steady. Even the floorboards didn't creak. It was like living inside a simulation of a house, one designed by someone who had studied the concept of home, but never lived in one. Elijah, my new roommate, brushed off my comments. "It's just well built," he said with a faint smile. "We're lucky." But then the little things started. A faint clicking in the walls at exactly 3:07 a.m. every night. The bathroom mirror fogging in perfect concentric circles instead of random swirls. And once, as I was falling asleep, a soft mechanical whir hummed from under my bed. A sound too precise, too regular to belong to pipes or settling wood. I convinced myself it was paranoia. The human brain, after all, is wired to find patterns, even where none exist. Weeks passed. My unease deepened. One afternoon I was dusting the vents when I noticed a small black disc tucked inside, its surface blinking with a faint red light. A camera. It wasn't part of any system I'd installed, and there were more. One behind the kitchen radiator, another in the ceiling vent above the shower. They weren't placed randomly. They were positioned for maximum coverage. I confronted Elijah that night, but he only shrugged. "Standard safety measures," he said. "You'd be surprised how often break-ins happen." His tone was calm, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. I wanted to believe him. I almost did, until, while cleaning the hall closet, I found an access panel I'd never noticed before. It was flush with the wall and painted to blend in, but once I pried it open, a narrow passage stretched beyond, one lined with cables, humming softly. At the end of that passage sat a small, windowless room. Banks of monitors glowed in the dark, each displaying a different view of the house. My bedroom, the kitchen, the stairwell, even the attic crawl space. I watched in numb silence as the footage looped back in time, days and weeks, capturing moments I hadn't realized were witnessed. Me talking in my sleep, staring too long into the bathroom mirror, pacing the living room while on the phone. It wasn't just surveillance. It was observation, meticulous, methodical, unblinking. And then I saw it. One of the monitors showed a feed I didn't recognize. A small white room I'd never been in, empty but for a single chair bolted to the floor. A timestamp flickered in the corner, a date 2 weeks from now. And beneath it a label written in neat clinical text, Subject 12, pulse thundering in my ears. Subject 12, that was me. There was no question now. The cameras weren't about safety, and this house wasn't just a home. It was a controlled environment, and I was part of an experiment I hadn't agreed to. My first instinct was to leave, grab my bag, get in the car, and never look back. But something in the back of my mind stopped me, a mix of fear and stubborn curiosity. If I walked away now, I might never know what they were planning. The next morning, I tested a theory. I moved the furniture in my room slightly, shifting the bed 2 feet from the wall and dragging my desk under the window. The following day, everything was exactly as I'd left it. But on the second day, the bed had returned to its original position. The desk too. I hadn't left the window open, hadn't given anyone a key. Someone, or something, was resetting the environment around me. Like a lab technician rearranging a maze after the rat had found the exit too quickly. That night, I waited. I pretended to sleep, body still beneath the covers, phone camera recording in silence from the nightstand. At 3:07 a.m., the clicking in the walls returned, sharper now, closer. And then I heard footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberate. The door creaked open and a faint beam of red light swept across the room, scanning the walls, the floor, me. I didn't dare move. The figure was tall, its face obscured by something smooth and featureless, a mask or maybe a screen. It paused at the foot of my bed, head tilting as if listening to a sound I couldn't hear. Then it left, closing the door without a sound. The next morning, the footage was gone. My phone's storage was corrupted, the recording erased. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I confronted Elijah again, but his usual calm was gone. "I told them you weren't ready," he muttered, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "You weren't supposed to find that room yet." When I pressed him, "Who was them? What was happening?" he only said one thing before walking out the door. "It's already started." The house changed after that. The clicking grew louder, the lights dimmed unpredictably, and once I woke to find every cabinet door in the kitchen standing open. The timestamp on the mysterious monitor approached. 2 days, then 1. And then, on the night of the marked date, I woke in that small white room, the one I'd only ever seen on the screen. My wrists were unbound, the door wide open, but I couldn't move. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts slow. A voice spoke from somewhere unseen. "Observation complete. Phase 2 begins now." I stumbled into the hallway, but it wasn't my house anymore. The walls were seamless, the air unnaturally still. Somewhere far above me, I heard the faint click of a camera shutter. I fled that place weeks ago. Yet the house I live in now hums at 3:07 a.m. too. Sometimes when I check my vents, I swear I see the faintest red light blinking, watching, waiting, as if the experiment never ended. I always assumed the silence was just Elijah being himself, the way he slipped through the house without sound, how his door never creaked, how the air never stirred when he passed. It was one of the reasons I tolerated him. In a world full of loud, messy people, Elijah was absence made flesh. But over time, that absence began to feel unnatural, as if he wasn't quiet but missing something fundamental. And then the little fractures appeared, hairline cracks in the story I'd built around him. A photo from a housewarming party where he should have been, but wasn't. A landlord who blinked blankly when I mentioned his name. A package addressed to him that vanished from the porch before I even brought it inside. It was a cold morning in late October when the first undeniable clue surfaced. I'd gone to knock on his door about a leak in the bathroom. My knuckles met air. The door swung open, not unlocked but unlatched, as if it had never been shut at all. Inside, the room was spotless. Too spotless. No clothes, no books, no laptop. No evidence anyone had lived there. Just a bed made so neatly it might have been staged for a photo. A faint hum came from somewhere behind the wall, like distant machinery, and in the middle of the floor sat a small black notebook with my name on the cover. I shouldn't have opened it. But I did. It wasn't a journal. It was a transcript, my transcript. Pages of conversations I'd had, thoughts I'd spoken aloud, dreams I'd half forgotten. Some were word-for-word recountings of things I'd said alone, when no one could have possibly heard me. Others were predictions of things I hadn't yet done but would days later. Subject 12 will attempt to contact landlord on October 28. Subject 12 will question Elijah's presence after package disappearance. The pages ended with a sentence written in block letters. Integration process nearing completion. I dropped the notebook like it was burning my hands. The hum behind the wall deepened, and I heard a faint clicking sound, like gears turning, metal teeth biting into metal. I pressed my ear against the plaster and caught something impossible, a heartbeat. Slow, steady, not mechanical, alive. When Elijah walked in moments later, it wasn't through the front door. He was simply there, standing in the hallway, watching me with that soft, practiced smile. "Looking for something?" he asked. His voice sounded the same, but now that I was listening differently, there was an undertone beneath it, an echo, as though a second voice spoke with him half a breath behind. I tried to speak, but the words died on my tongue. He took a step closer, then another, each one perfectly measured, as if calculated. "You weren't supposed to find that yet," he said. "But maybe it's time." And then he blinked, but only once. His left eyelid didn't move. It stayed open, unblinking, staring. For the first time, I noticed his chest wasn't rising and falling. He wasn't breathing. The hum in the wall surged, and something behind it shifted. Not a machine, but something that knew I was listening. I stumbled backward, my shoulder colliding with the door frame, but Elijah didn't follow. He stood there in the hallway, smiling faintly, eyes fixed on me with an intensity that felt both human and not. "You're afraid," he said softly, "but you don't need to be. Fear is just your body trying to understand something bigger than itself." The words were ordinary, but something about the way he spoke them, too evenly, too rehearsed, made them sound less like reassurance and more like observation, as though he were cataloging my reactions for later study. "What are you?" I whispered. The words felt childish, but no other question made sense. "Who?" he corrected gently. "I am who you needed me to be." I bolted past him into the living room, fumbling for my phone. I needed evidence, proof I wasn't losing my mind. But the screen refused to unlock. My fingerprint wasn't recognized. My passcode failed again and again. On the fourth attempt, the phone unlocked on its own, displaying a series of photos. Not ones I'd taken, but of me. Dozens of them, stretching back months, sleeping, eating, staring blankly out the window. All from angles that could only have been taken from inside the walls. "Elijah," I said, my voice cracking, "why do you have these?" He didn't answer. Instead, the lights in the house dimmed and a low vibration rippled beneath the floor. The hum I'd heard earlier was back, stronger now, layered with something that almost resembled a pulse. Elijah tilted his head slightly, like someone listening to distant music. "It's close," he murmured. "You feel it, don't you? The alignment, the crossing." "Crossing what?" I shouted, but he just smiled and walked toward the wall, through the wall. Not into a hidden door or a passage, but through the plaster itself, as if it were a thin veil of smoke. One moment he was there, and the next the wall rippled and swallowed him whole. The hum deepened into a steady rhythmic beat, and somewhere inside it, I heard something speak. Not in words, but in recognition. It knew me. I pressed my palms against the wall where Elijah had vanished. It was warm, almost feverishly so, and it seemed to throb gently under my touch. And then I heard it again, a heartbeat. But this time it wasn't behind the wall. It was in sync with mine, faster when I panicked, slower when I steadied my breath, as though the house itself was mirroring me. "Elijah," I screamed, pounding on the plaster. "Come back," a voice answered, but not from the hallway. It came from inside the wall, close enough that I felt its breath on my skin. I never left. The surface pulsed once more, and for a split second, I saw a face looking back at me from beneath the paint. Elijah's face, but shifting, rearranging, flickering into my own features and back again. A cold realization sank into me then. Elijah had never been a person. He had been a vessel, a projection, a shape sculpted from everything I'd revealed to the house. It hadn't learned from him. It had learned through him, and now it was learning me. I moved out weeks later, but sometimes I still catch my reflection breathing out of sync in a darkened window. And every so often, just before sleep, I hear a heartbeat pulsing in the walls, steady, patient, and perfectly matched to my own. Subscribe, if you dare.